Hello, I'm Andrew Hawnt and welcome to Andrew Haunt's Rock Revival. What is this? It's a show where I talk about old rock and metal albums from the 80s and 90s because now I'm in my 40s I need to look backwards all the time, it would seem. So if you're not familiar with who I am and what I've done in the past, I am an author, comic book writer, filmmaker, and a bunch of other stuff. Failed musician being one of those. But for 9 years, I wrote for POWERPLAY Rock and Metal magazine here in the UK, which I enjoyed greatly. I did it for 9 years. I only had to stop when it became too much to keep up with the day job and family life and everything like that. But I still have a huge passion for rock music, old and new, and I wanted to talk about that here on this channel. So really, this came out of a marketing email. For once, a marketing email worked. I got an email from Mixcloud where a lot of my previous stuff has been housed, and it said, "Oh, these listeners are missing you. You've not uploaded anything for a while." And I thought, what can I upload? You know, I've done some DJ mixes and things like that. I've done my movie podcast on the VHS 8 My Brain podcast, based on my book and magazine column of the same name. And I just wanted to do something a bit more specialised. So, with Andrew Haunt's Rock Revival, I'm going to talk about old rock albums. I fully expect this to be something I do entirely for my own pleasure. I don't expect anyone to be listening to this right now, but if you are, thank you, you're awesome. I will, of course, add these audio episodes to my YouTube channel as well. If you do check out my YouTube channel, it's youtube.com/Andrew Haunt, and you'll find my movies on there. Such as The Demon and I. You'll find my podcasts, sorry, not podcasts, my shows such as Planet Hex, and there's a bunch of stuff on there that's fun to do. So where did my love of rock and metal music come from? So it arrived about the age of 12 and became a huge fan of bands such as Def Leppard, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Wasp, and Ozzy Osbourne of Van Halen, and all the other good ones. But they were all actually a bit from the previous era to my own. So I was growing up at the start of the 90s. I hit 12 in 1990, and beyond at the time, everything was edging towards a more alternative sound. Of course, in 1991, we had the arrival of Nirvana in a big way with Smells Like Teen Spirit and subsequently the album Nevermind, their second album. They'd had Bleach before that, but it was that second album that changed the musical landscape into a more alternative one. And I recognised that went on. It was a thing, but it didn't really appeal to me at the time. What I wanted was the glam bands, the old school metal bands, the thrash metal bands, the death metal bands, just the stuff that had come from a much louder, more glamorous, more dramatic, theatrical era. So that's probably what I'm going to end up covering a lot of on this show here on the Rock Revival. It doesn't include any music. This is just me talking about classic albums and some obscure albums and why they are important to me and they're important to music in general and the development of the rock and metal scene through the years. So for this first episode, I'm just going to dive in, picked one at random, and it's Night Songs, the debut album by Cinderella. Now, a lot of people may be more familiar with Cinderella's later output, things like songs like Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone, Long Cold Winter, Heartbreak Station, and Gypsy Road and things like that. But it's this first album for me, the debut album, which is the one that works best. On their later material, they developed more of a bluesy sound, more of a bluesy traditional rock sound. But on this first album, Night Songs, it was more dramatic. It had more of a hard rock, edging in towards heavy metal sound, very of its time, and it really caught my attention. Of course, the first thing that caught my attention was the cover, with the band stood in a smoky alley in all of their mid-80s glam metal hairband finery. Fantastic stuff. I love the cover of this. It tells you everything you need to know about what you're in for with that album. So, Night Songs by Cinderella was initially released on June the 9th, 1986 on Mercury Records. It was produced by Andy Johns. So, this album, it kicks off with a really potent statement of intent. So it kicks off with the title track. Now, This is quite hard hitting. It's quite mid-paced. It could even be described as slow burning, but it has the eerie intro, nice build up, and then quite a big hook in there. Of course, one of the most noticeable things on there is Tom Kiefer's voice. So Tom Kiefer, frontman, guitarist, one of two guitar players in Cinderella, has a very distinctive voice, like a high-pitched screech along the lines of like Bon Scott, Brian Johnson, or for those of you that are aware of them, Dizzy Dean Davidson from Britney Fox. I'm sure I'll get to those at some point on this show as well. But he has quite a distinctive voice which set him apart from a lot of the cleaner singers of the time, and really made people's ears prick up and listen. So yeah, Night Songs, the first song, very dramatic. It's not quite a ballad, but it's kind of a slow burning, dark, hard rock song. It's very effective as an opener, and a lot of openers are quite heavy or fast, or this just lets itself be what it is. Has a great big chorus, a really memorable yet not too flashy guitar solo from Mr. Kiefer, and an irresistible hook. The second track on Night Songs by Cinderella is Shake Me, which is a much more traditional hard rock song, very much of its time, very much in the mold of the mid-80s sort of party rock anthem. And I think the closest I believe that this album actually gets to a party rock album, a party rock sound. And it's also a little hint of what was to come in later albums, I feel, where they would go for a more roots rock, traditional rock and blues feel with their music. So that's a good song. That's a good song, but it does pale in comparison to what was their first single, the third track on Night Songs, which was Nobody's Fool. Now, Nobody's Fool, it actually cracked the top 20. Apparently, that hit number 13 in the US charts, and it's a ballad. And it has a very simple riff. The riff for the chorus is only 3 chords. I think it's 4 chords in the verses and 3 in the chorus, and it's deceptively simple. Again, has an interesting solo from Mr. Kiefer, an enormous chorus. It has a perfect 80s rock ballad chorus, because you're going there from like A minor down to F to G. It's so simple. It couldn't be more simple, but it is very effective in that time and place, and it was a definite highlight of this debut album. That's followed by Nothing for Nothing, which is a great song. It's nowhere near on the level of Night Songs or Nobody's Fool, but Nothing for Nothing, dark, it has a dark element to it, very theatrical, dramatic, hard rock song. Once Around the Ride follows this. All of these songs, by the way, they don't have a particularly long running time. There's 10 songs on the album, and it comes in at 36 minutes. 36 minutes, 5 seconds. And, that's not particularly long for 10 songs. Most of them are around the 3.5 minute mark. But yes, Once Around the Ride has some more interesting riffs in it, a little bit more complicated. Does keep it more on the dramatic side again, and doesn't really fit with what came after, but I personally prefer this. So Hell on Wheels follows this. Track 6 is Hell on Wheels, and has a bit of a Motley Crue feel to these ears. I think it had a bit of a Motley Crue feel. Feel free to tell me different if you believe differently. That's it feels a bit more like, it feels like at that point they've sort of hit their groove with a dramatic hard rock sound that's fist pumping choruses. Tom Kiefer's wailing away, and they seem to have settled into a sound there. But then you get Somebody Save Me, which is a little bit heavier. Now, I'm not talking it's like Metallica, Anthrax, Death, or Meshuggah sort of level, but it is heavier and a little bit darker than what has come before. It's a little bit more like Once Around the Ride from earlier on in the album. In From the Outside feels a tiny bit like filler. Personally, it feels a little bit like filler. It's not a bad song. It's just, after things like the earlier tracks, it starts to feel a little bit like we've heard some of this before. Same again with Push Push and the closing track, Back Home Again. So the album does somewhat peter out towards the end, after the midway point. Of course, back in the day, it was towards towards the end of side 2 of the vinyl or the cassette. I personally found this on cassette. That's how it came into my life, and it was loaded into my sticker-covered Walkman, which I lovingly refer to as the Rock Box. So yeah, that's what was going on with that album there. As I said, they did move on from this sound once they'd found their footing. They'd gathered a big following from supporting Bon Jovi on a tour for a certain album named Slippery When Wet. So you can imagine they came into the awareness of a heck of a lot of people through the Slippery When Wet tour. I mean, could you imagine? That must have been a great night out. Cinderella and Bon Jovi, with Bon Jovi at the height of their powers and the height of their popularity with Slippery When Wet. Absolute watershed moment. And bringing out a band like Cinderella, who, of course, they weren't massive at the start, but they did build more of a following as they went on. It must have been a great time. It must have been a fantastic time. I never got to see these bands in their heyday, which you know, I've never been particularly pleased about it, but it is what it is. I mean, I didn't start going to gigs until 1991 when my dad took me to see Rush at the Sheffield Arena with support from Primus. Now that was a weird night. That was followed by another arena show in 1992 with Def Leppard, with Gun opening up for them, also at the Sheffield Arena, and it just went on from there. But yeah, I never got to see the so-called hair bands in their prime, but that didn't stop me loving them and taking them for myself. I've always had a bit of an underdog thing where I tend to like stuff that's not particularly in fashion at the time. It's just we all have our ways, and I was fascinated by the culture, the music, the styles of the 1980s at the height of grunge. So of course I stuck out like a sore thumb. I started dressing in 80s clothes. I watching a heck of a lot of John Hughes movies. Yeah, it's just I stuck out so much in the grunge era. It was unreal. You know, you're still trying to find your footing at that age. I was 12, 13, 14 when it was all going on, and I found a great deal of solace in these albums, and Night Songs was definitely one of the albums that I enjoyed thoroughly, and I still enjoy it to this day. I've been playing it recently, and it has held up really well. Personally, for me, it holds up better than their later stuff, where the blues rock and more traditional rootsy rock sort of direction that Cinderella went in, it didn't really work for me. It worked for lots of other people, and that's absolutely fine, but it didn't really grab me the way Night Songs did. I do believe it is a very strong debut album, even though it didn't particularly get that great reviews at the time. I know that it isn't held in high regard by tons of people, but it is held in high regard by people with taste. You know what I mean, I'm kidding. I didn't really understand the impact this album had on a lot of people's lives until I saw a video of Lizzie Hale from Hailstorm duetting with Tom Kiefer on a live version of Nobody's Fall, and I do wonder what it's like for musicians that had stuff out in, so-called classic eras of music. This is something I have talked to rock stars about in the past during my magazine days. It's just like when I was interviewing Def Leppard, I interviewed Joe Elliott from Def Leppard and talked a little about this with him. I am curious as to what it's like when something you created years ago has become so ingrained in the lives of people that it's, these things are so ingrained in our lives. These songs and these albums become markers along the journey of our lives. And I wonder what that's like for musicians. I wonder how musicians kind of deal with that and process that. Because if you talk to a musician, I could say to Tom Kiefer, Nobody's Fall got me through some really difficult times as a teenager in the 90s. And by that time, Cinderella had already recorded it, put it out in 1986, toured off the back of it, and had subsequent albums out by then, and then started to fade from awareness of the mainstream anyway. And yet, even now, 25 million years later, I still find myself drawn to this older music that helped me through bad times. I find a great deal of solace in it, as I'm sure a lot of older rock fans do. But yeah, Night Songs by Cinderella, an interesting album, different to what came after it. If you're only familiar with their later material, do give this a try. I think you would be surprised. I would liken it, like using Def Leppard as an example, I would liken Night Songs and the later material by Cinderella to comparing Def Leppard's High and Dry to Pyromania. They're very close together in when they were made, but they're so different in approach and outcome that it's unreal. Do give this album a try. So that was Night Songs by Cinderella, and this isn't the first tester episode. Think of it as a pilot or anything you like for Andrew Hawnt's Rock Revival. I look forward to bringing some more episodes where I talk about other albums to you very soon. I hope you've enjoyed this. Please do leave a comment below and let me know what you think. And if you've enjoyed it, fabulous. Please do subscribe, and we'll be in touch again soon. Thanks for checking out the show.